Okay, so thank you everybody for coming to this, let's see, the right view here, session of a random walk down Mill Street. We're going to talk about Dreamers and Doers, Zionism and Shearith Israel. And the people that we're going to focus on, there are a lot of figures we could talk about, but the ones that we're going to talk about are here. Gershom Mendy Seixas, the patriot rabbi of Shearith Israel, the patriot minister during the revolution. Mordechai Emanuel Noah, who was the most famous American Jew in the first half of the 19th century. Emma Lazarus, the poet, the author of the New Colossus on the Statue of Liberty. Reverend Dr. Henry Pereira Mendes, who was the minister of our congregation from 1877 till his death in 1936. And David and Tamar de Sola Poole, Rabbi Dr. Poole was the rabbi and Tamar was his wife, and they were ardent Zionists as well. We'll get there at the end. There are more people I could talk about, but these are the ones I've chosen. Let's see how we go. Let's see how much we do. I suspect we're going to go about 45 minutes, but we'll see. So we're going to start way back with Gershom Mendy Seixas. And the reason we're going to start with Gershom Mendy Seixas is because Gershom Mendy Seixas, even though one could not call him a Zionist in any modern sense, or maybe even not a proto-Zionist, as we'll see some of the other figures we're going to talk about, but he is influential. He is influential on the thinking about Palestine and the return to Palestine for future generations that came under his wing or his influence. In almost every sermon that's published, he talks about returning to Zion or some kind of returning to self-rule. Now, this is not a modern concept of Zionism as we know it. Rather, he is discussing this type of thing that we pray about for every single day. In the Amidah, as well as in other prayers, that the Lord should bring the Messiah, that we should be returned to Israel, we should build the temple, and return to the worship of the Lord in our land in Israel. But the significant thing about Seixas is that he was preaching in a period where the American cause had just been triumphant, and self-determination was possible, and the overthrow of an oppressive government was possible. Not only that, he also lived through the French Revolution and Napoleon, and these things are reflected in his sermons. So I just want to start with his Thanksgiving Day sermon. This is a very, very famous sermon delivered in 1789 at the very first Thanksgiving, and it's been published and republished and talked about all the time, but it's an important place to start. So I'm just going to read through what's on the left. It's a quote from a long sermon. It's not all, it looks like one big paragraph here, but it comes from all over the place in that sermon, and we'll read through it. The wonderful display of his, being God's divine providence, in the course and conclusion of the late war, meaning the revolution, the happy consequences derived therefrom by an establishment of public liberty, the recent mercies conferred on these states by the general approbation and adoption of a new constitution, are all blessings that demand our most grateful acknowledgement to the supreme ruler of the universe. It's Thanksgiving. It's a Thanksgiving Day address saying we have to give thanks for the revolution, for the Constitution, for our new country. More especially as we, Jews, are made equal partakers of every benefit that results from this good government, for which we cannot sufficiently adore the God of our fathers. Jews, this is something special. We especially have to give thanks because unlike other places in the world, we are equal citizens in this amazing new enterprise, this new republic, the United States of America. But he warns, amidst your rejoicings, it is necessary that you still keep in remembrance that we are at all times and upon all occasions bound to obey every rule that he has ordained. As though so he's saying you have to follow the Torah, follow God's law. We, by our sins and transgressions, as well as by the sins of our fathers, are in captivity, which means galut. Yet we may, by an acknowledgement of our evil actions, if we do teshuvah, we may find grace in the sight of our Creator and again be restored to our own land. For this we have many strong assurances in the sacred writings. Our predecessors have been, and we are still at this time in captivity among the different nations of the earth. And though we are, through divine goodness, made equal partakers of the benefits of government by the constitution of these states with the rest of the inhabitants, still we cannot but view ourselves as captives in comparison to what we were formerly and what we expect to be hereafter, when the outcasts of Israel shall be gathered together. Now, this is the first Thanksgiving sermon, and I think it's significant that within that message of thanksgiving to the Lord for our new nation, our Constitution, he has a pretty strong message that we got to keep the law, keep Torah, and that we want to go back to, don't get so comfortable. We want to go back to Israel, even though we have it better than anywhere else right here in this country. And that message is given in many, many sermons. And I have a few others, and they each have a little bit of a different flavor, a little color. So I want to read a few of them. In 1798, so this is after the French Revolution. There's even more time to reflect on the position of Jews in America and in the world. It says, when we reflect on the situation and circumstances of the present wars and the depravity and corrupt state of human nature that prevails almost throughout the world, we must necessarily be led to believe that the glorious period of redemption is near at hand, and that our God will make manifest his intentions, again collecting the scattered remnants of Israel and establishing them according to his divine promise. He's saying Mashiach must be coming soon, and get ready. we have to follow the law and get ready for our redemption to the promised land. And then in 1804, he again says something similar. God will gather us from all corners of the earth, wherein we shall be scattered and reinstate us in our former possessions, in our own land, and under our own government. So in addition to preaching about the return to Zion, which is a religious message, he also saw no conflict between being a good citizen, proud of the United States, and wanting to return to Israel. Now, the reason I start with Gershom Mendy Seixas is because not only did he preach this message of returning to Israel, he was influential on other people. And I have a few of them here on the slide here. Samson Simpson. One day, I don't know if I'll get to it in this series, but one day, maybe Rabbi Soloveitchik can speak about him, or maybe I'll be able to speak about him. Samson Simpson is an amazing person. I'm not going to go. This is not a talk about him, but Simpson was a very wealthy individual. He also was a multi-generational New Yorker, meaning he was descended from many generations of Jewish New Yorkers, going back quite a bit. His father, I think, was also influential in Shearith, Israel. And he leaves in his will $50,000. That's a huge number in 1857 to Israel, to the amelioration of the poor in Israel. He also is the founder of Jews Hospital, which is now called Mount Sinai, and other philanthropic activities here at Shearith Israel and elsewhere. His partner in his mission to give money was also Judah Turo. Judah Turo had died just before him, and Samson Simpson sort of modeled his donation of $50,000 on the same language that was used by Judah Turo. But Judah Turo also left $50,000 to the amelioration of the poor in Israel, which he did in his will, which was made just a little bit before he died. And the main person who was responsible for Judah Turo's philanthropy and return to Judaism, because Judah Turo had lived very secularly without any kind of connection to the Jewish world in New Orleans for a long time. Judah Turo grew up in Newport, and then he moves to the South after he wanted to marry a cousin of his, and his family nixed the match. They were too close, I guess. He didn't like it, and he never got married. And he moved away, and he went to New Orleans, and he did his own thing. Gershom Kershey, who was the grandson of Gershom Mendy Statius, right? Statius' grandson, grew up in Richmond and then moved to New Orleans, befriended Drew Turo, and basically brought him back to religion and had him found a synagogue in New Orleans, which still exists today. If you Google the Turo Synagogue, you're either going to get the one in Newport or going to get the one in New Orleans. And he's responsible for getting Drew Turo to give his money to Jewish causes, including Israel. And so when he writes his will, which is very close to the end of his life, he leaves a huge sum for the amelioration of the poor in Israel. And the executor of his will is Gershom Kershey. And he does, together with Montefiore in London, he administers these funds in the first settlement outside the old city, which we know today, Mishkan Shinanot, where the windmill is, and other charitable causes, including Shearith Israel and almost every other synagogue in America. So all of that, though, is influenced by Gershom Mendy Statius and his sermon. This desire to return to Israel is not, it's a universal kind of thing in Judaism, but had a special significance in America. That's why I start with Gershom Mendy Statius. More could be said, but I leave it there. The other person who was influenced by Statius, another member of Shearith Israel, Mordechai Emanuel Noah. Noah, let's just see if there's anything in the chat. No, okay. Okay. Noah was, let's see, the most famous Jew in America in the first half of the 19th century. And why do I say that? He was wealthy. He was a grandson of Jonas Phillips, and he came from a prominent family. He also was a politico, and he made friends with all sorts of important people, including John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. And he was appointed to be the consul to Tunis. And he was there actually, I think, in 1815, 1817. And he was there during the Barbary pirate situation. And so he got some fame within America generally. He was also a publisher of a newspaper and an author and a playwright, a well-known figure in New York, and especially among the Jews of New York. He was certainly the most famous Jew in New York and the whole country in that era. He really can be called a proto-Zionist, and we're going to spend a lot of time on him because he was a man. He was not just a dreamer; he was also a man of action, as we will see. But his first public discussion of Israel and Jews' return to their homeland begins in 1818. He was asked to speak at the consecration of the Second Mill Street Synagogue. That consecration took place on Shabbat HaGadol, and he gave a lengthy oration, which he then published afterward and sent his discourse to many famous people, including John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And it's many pages long, but I want to read a few bits of it because they are his first public discussion about his thoughts on the Jews' return, the Jews' state of Judaism in his day, and their return to Israel. So he starts talking about other countries and anti-Semitism around the world. And then he says on the top here, let us turn then from Europe and her errors of opinion on points of faith to contemplate a more noble prospect. Our country, the United States, the bright example of universal tolerance, of liberality, true religion, and good faith. In the formation and arrangement of our civil code, the sages and patriots whose collected wisdom adopted them closed the doors upon that great evil which had shaken the old world to its center. They proclaimed freedom of conscience and left the errors of the heart to be judged at that tribunal whose right should never have been usurped. Meaning, you can believe what you want religiously, and God will be the ultimate judge. But there is civil equality here. Here, no inequality of privileges, no asperity of opinion, no invidious distinctions exist here in America. Dignity is blended with equality, justice administered impartially. Merit alone has fixed value. And each man is stimulated by the same laudable ambition, an ambition of doing his duty and meriting the goodwill of his fellow citizens. Until the Jews can recover their ancient rights and dominions and take their rank among the governments of the earth, this is their chosen country. Meaning, until the Messiah comes and we go back to Israel, the United States of America is where Jews should live. Here they can rest with the persecuted from every clime, secure in person and property, protected from tyranny and oppression, and participating of equal rights and immunities. 40 years of experience since the revolution have tested the wisdom of our institutions, and they only will be surrendered with the existence of the nation. He goes on and he talks about what he thinks Jews should do. This is on Shabbat Hagadol, a long lecture. And he talks about Jewish education, the need to speak Hebrew and learn Hebrew. He also talks about learning a skill trade rather than finance or trading. He wants Jews to take part in, agriculture and farming, and that we should adhere to our religion, much like Gershom Mendes Seixas' message in the previous generation. This is, by the way, I didn't include any of this. This is his most religious discourse, where he talked about observing the laws and faithfully. Some of his later ones are less religious. Interesting enough, that's for another time. But then he goes on, and this is on the right-hand side. Here, then, the promise is made. God will never break his covenant with his people Israel, and they will continue to keep his commandments, walk in his ways, and merit his divine protection. This is after he had just made a whole litany of quotes from the prophets. Never were the prospects for the restoration of the Jewish nation to their ancient rights and dominion more brilliant than they are at present, 1818. There are upwards of 7 million Jews known to be in existence. And that little footnote in the end of his booklet, he goes through all the countries and he adds up all the population of all the Jews throughout the whole world. A number greater than at any period of our history and possessing more wealth, activity, influence, and talents than any body of people of their number on earth. The signal for breaking the Turkish scepter in Europe, I mean, the Ottoman Empire, they own Palestine. The signal for breaking the Turkish scepter in Europe will be their emancipation, the Jews' emancipation. They will deliver the north of Africa from its oppressors. They will assist to establish civilization in European Turkey, meaning the Jews, and may revive commerce and the arts in Greece. They will march in triumphant numbers and possess themselves once more of Syria, by which he means Palestine, he means Israel, and take their rank among the governments of the earth. This is not fancy. I have been too much among them in Europe and Africa. I am too well acquainted with their views and sentiments in Asia to doubt their intentions. They hold the purse strings and can wield the sword. They can bring 100,000 men into the field. Let us then hope that the day is not far distant when, from the operation of liberal and enlightened measures, we may look towards that country where our people have established a mild, just, and honorable government, accredited by the world and admired by all good men. He is telling his readers here in the synagogue of Shearith Israel on Mill Street, the second Mill Street synagogue on Shabbat Hagadol, that there are 100,000, there are millions of Jews around the world, and basically the countries that he mentions that are going to rise up are the Sephardic ones: North Africa, Greece, Turkey, and they're going to wield an army, and they're going to overthrow the Turkish Sultan and take over Syria, which means Israel, and establish there a benevolent country. And he calls this is not fancy. No, this is going to happen, he tells everybody. That's 1818. Now, Mordechai Emanuel Noah, he didn't just leave it at this lecture in 1818. He sent that lecture around to others, including great American politicians like John Adams, who wrote back to him. So let's take a look. If I can turn the page here. Yeah, on the left, here is a letter of John Adams in response to this and another publication that Mordechai Emanuel Noah sent to him. This is a small excerpt from it. Again, this is John Adams, who was the second president, the president of the United States, former president of the United States. If I were to let my imagination loose, I should wish you had been a member of Napoleon's Institute at Cairo. Nay, farther, I could find it in my heart to wish that you had been at the head of 100,000 Israelites indeed. That's the number that he mentioned earlier. As well disciplined as a French army, marching with them into Judea, making a conquest of that country and restoring your nation to the dominion of it. For I really wish the Jews again in Judea an independent nation. For as I believe the most enlightened men of it have participated in the ameliorations of the philosophy of the age, once restored to an independent government and no longer persecuted, they would soon wear away of their asperities and peculiarities and of their character, and possibly in time become liberal Unitarian Christians like me. I am, sir, with respect and esteem, your obliged, humble servant, John Adams. So Noah is encouraged by letters like this and others to continue his effort to restore a Jewish nation in Judea. He also, so as a result of that, he writes letters to all sorts of newspapers in Europe, in Germany, and in Central Europe, telling people to move to America because it's great here, and that's where Jews should go before our ultimate redemption to the land of Israel. And I have a quote here from an article by a fellow named Louis Rukamis, that appeared in AJS Quarterly in 1975. Really great article. I couldn't find the quotes that he was quoting from, so I just quoted the article. Although Noah's proposals for immigration to the United States seem generally to have fallen upon deaf ears, they did meet with a warm response within a small group of German scholars, the now famous Verein für Kultur und Wissenschaft des Judentums. This is Wissenschaft, the movement in Germany, founded in Berlin in 1819. In 1822, Edward Gans, the organization's president, later converted to Christianity, Leopold Zunz, its vice president, and Moses Moser, its first vice secretary, wrote to Noah, thanking him for encouraging European Jewry to come to the United States, expressing their high regard for his meritorious undertaking, making him an extraordinary member of the society and correspondent general for the United States. And they asked him for more information about the Jews of the United States and expressed their interest in continuing correspondence. And this is a quote from their letter to him about the means of transplanting a vast portion of European Jews to the United States. So Mordechai Emanuel Noah's thinking is growing grander and grander. He's going to make a Jewish homeland in America for the Jews of Europe before going on to Palestine and Israel. And as you can see, I have here a picture on the bottom. This is what Noah is most famous for today, at least in Zionist circles. He didn't just have this dream; he took action on it, and he created something, a place called Ararat, which is where Noah's Ark lands in the Torah, and his name is Noah, and he wants there to be a Jewish homeland, and he called it Ararat, a city of refuge for the Jews, founded by Mordechai Emanuel Noah in 1825. So you can see from 1818 to 1819, he's writing letters to people, he's getting responses, positive responses, he's inviting Jews of Europe to move, and now in 1825, he's ready to create himself the new Jewish homeland, which he does. And Ararat, however, is not located in Israel, it's located in America. It's located on Grand Island. which, if you are not familiar, it's just south of Niagara Falls, west of Buffalo. This pretty big island here is called Grand Island. This is Canada, this is New York, and this is Grand Island right in the center. And what Mordechai Emanuel Noah does is he gets together with a bunch of investors, and he purchases a huge tract of land on Grand Island, and he sends letters to people all over Europe saying, move to the new Jewish homeland called Ararat. And then in September, he doesn't wait for anybody to come. In September, he has a big inauguration on Grand Island, where he has that stone that I showed you earlier, which is also copied for you on the top right here, with a huge procession of people, hundreds of people, and speakers, and he wears a fancy dress, and he gives an address, a proclamation, which he later publishes, just to the Jews, proclamation to the Jews, and it's really long, and I could only give you a little part of it, the part that it really relates to Zionism, but it's kooky, it's completely insane. It says things like he calls for he's going to give a tax of shekels to the Jews in order to have his land here in Grand Island. He calls himself a judge in Israel, declares himself to be a judge in Israel, like a shofet of old. He goes all out with his plan, all out. He with all sorts of things about the American Indians, about polygamy, abolishing polygamy, Hebrew language, bringing Karaites and Samaritans back into the fold. Goes on and on. He also he mentions people by name, such as Rabbi Abraham de Cologne, who was a chief rabbi of France, a rabbi in Bordeaux, whose name was Andrade, Rabbis Herschel and Meldola of London, and a whole list of other rabbis that he says are going to be part of the leaders of this, kind of a Sanhedrin type thing that will adjudicate all the rules of Jewish law for this new Jewish homeland. He never spoke to any of those people before he said this, not a single one. And it goes on. He goes on and on and on, kind of strangely. But there is an important part here that I want to read to you right here. This is a portion of that proclamation. He writes, called together to the Holy Land by the slow but unerring finger of providence, the Jews coming from every quarter of the globe would bring with them the language, habits, and prejudices of each country, assimilating only in religious doctrines and divided on temporal affairs. They would present innumerable difficulties in organizing under any form of government, and the diversity of opinions and views would create factions as dangerous and difficult to allay as those fatal ones which existed in the time of the First and Second Temple. Saying, if Jews tried to settle in Palestine and Israel now under the Ottomans, it would be impossible. If everyone spoke a different language, it would be crazy. It is in this country, here in the United States, that the government of Jews must be organized. Here, under the influence of perfect freedom, they may study laws, cultivate their mind, acquire liberal principles as to mean and measures, and qualify themselves to direct the energies of a just and honorable government in the land of the patriarchs. So he's saying, come here to America, we'll set up a Jewish homeland, we'll figure out it, we'll make a government here, people will learn agriculture and Hebrew, and everyone will get on the same page, and then we'll be able to move to Israel and restore our homeland where it ought to be. That was his plan. Nobody came. Literally nobody moved to Ararat. 0 people moved there. And it was a big failure, both in concept as well as a financial failure for him and his investors. And we could stop the story there, except no, it doesn't stop. He is undeterred. By the way, the response of one of the rabbis to his effort, I have here on the left. This is Rabbi Abraham de Cologne, who was the chief rabbi of Paris, writing in 1826, shortly after September 1825 was when Ararat was declared, and then the chief rabbi, it makes its way around Europe, and the chief rabbi writes a letter, an open letter in the newspaper in Paris that responds. And this is just little excerpts from it, commenting on the whole Arab plan. He says, in the whole, it's excellent, but two trifles are wanting. First, well-authenticated proof of the mission and authority of Mr. Noah, meaning he's not the Messiah. Who are you, Mr. Mordechai Manuel Noah, to create a new Jewish homeland? And secondly, the prophetic text which points out a marsh in North America as a spot for reassembling the scattered remains of Israel. God alone knows the epoch of the Israelitish restoration, and that a political national effort like Mordechai Manuel Noah wants is forbidden as an act of high treason against divine majesty. These are arguments we hear today. We usually associate them with, Ture Karta and Satmar, but this was the Orthodox, traditional religious response to those who wanted to create a Jewish homeland in Israel. You can't force God's hand. When the Messiah comes, we'll move to Israel. And then he suggests that the Jews are too much attached to the countries where they dwell and devoted to the governments under which they enjoy liberty and protection, not to treat as a mere jest the chimerical consulate of a pseudo-restorer. And finally, he concludes with a positive note. He calls Noah a visionary of good intention. But he really just goes to the heart of it, he cuts it out, because it's a joke. It's a joke, he tells his readers. Mordechai Manuel responds to this letter, and he says, thank you very much, even though you don't agree with it, in nice language, he basically says, any publicity is good publicity for me, so go ahead and bash it all you want. That's all you're going to see in the end. It's going to be good. Of course, nobody came. It wasn't that great. But that also does not deter, that never, the belief in the return to a Jewish homeland never stops in Mordechai Manuel Noah. You'd think that you would be defeated by this terrible failure. No, he's not defeated. He goes on, he speaks more and more about the Jews' restoration to their homeland, but his thinking changes. He gave a couple of lectures around it, but the most famous one is this one, the last one, that was published in 1844. And he spoke in a big place called the Tabernacle. So I don't really know exactly what it was. It was not a church. It was more like Cooper Union, like a big hall in New York City in 1844. And he attracted a huge audience of Jews and Christians to his discourse on the restoration of the Jews. This is 1844, well after his failure of 1825, 1826. And again, it's a long work. I've only excerpted parts of it, but they're important and interesting to read. So let's take a look. Let me try to move this out of the way. So. Okay. The first paragraph comes from the preface, and the rest comes from the actual work itself. In the observations which I have made, and the facts detailed in relation to the great work of restoration, let it not be understood that I speak in the name and behalf of the Jewish people throughout the world. I seek to commit no one who differs with me. So he's learned his lesson from Ararat, that he doesn't declare himself to be a judge in Israel. He makes no proclamations about what the Jews need to do, and he doesn't assign people roles without telling them. He's just speaking for himself of what he thinks should happen. And he goes on, every attempt to colonize Jews in other countries has failed, meaning his own attempt. I don't know what other attempts he means, but his attempt at Ararat has failed. Their eye has steadily rested on their own beloved Jerusalem. Meaning, don't try to make a Jewish homeland elsewhere. Maybe Herzl and some of the others should have thought about what happened to Noah when they were considering Uganda. And he goes on, we never yet have been fully sensible of our duties and obligations as agents of a higher power. Providence has endowed us with mind, reason, energy, blessed us with ample means to carry out his express wishes. It is our duty, if the fulfillment of that divine promise can be secured by mortal means and human agency, to see it executed. He is directly answering those detractors like the rabbi from Paris, saying, if we can affect the creation of a Jewish homeland, we should. Will the dews of heaven produce a harvest without the labor of husbandmen? Will food just grow out of the ground and we don't need to, cultivate it? And no, agriculture requires work. So the same thing, if you want to move to the Jewish homeland, it requires work. But we cannot move alone in the great work of the restoration. The power and the influence of our Christian brethren, which now control the destinies of the world, must be invoked in carrying out this most interesting project. So he recognizes that the political will needs to be, the Jews have to play politics. We have to get friends. We can't do it on our own, but we have to do it. If we can, we should. We shouldn't just wait for God to make it happen. We have to affect it. We have to cause it to happen, which is a very modern view, unlike what others were saying in 1830s, 1840s. But will they go? Meaning, will anybody settle there when the day of the redemption arrives? All will go who feel the oppressor's yoke. So he says, if you're living in a place where there are unfair laws, where there's pogroms and anti-Semitism, you're going to go to the new Jewish homeland in Israel. But those who live in America, what about that? Restoration is not for us alone, but for millions unborn. We may repose where we are free and happy, he's talking in New York, but those who bowed to the earth by repression would gladly exchange a condition of vassalage for the hope of freedom. That hope the Jews can never surrender. We must not stop to ask whether the Jews will consent to occupy the land of Israel as free men. Restoration is not for us alone, but for millions unborn. There is no fanaticism in it. It is easy, tranquil, natural, and gradual. Let the people go. Point out the path for them in safety, and they will go. Not all, but sufficient to constitute the elements of a powerful government, and those who are happy here may cast their eyes towards the sun as it rises, and know that it rises a free and happy people beyond the mountains of Judea. So he's saying, will everyone go? No, not everyone will go. Some people will stay here in New York, some people will stay wherever they are. But those who are feeling the oppression of governments elsewhere will move there. And so we need to do it. We need to do it for them and their children and their children's children. We need to make a homeland in Israel. And that's 1844. So Mordechai Emanuel, some people often, make fun of his attempt at Ararat, but he was a real proto-Zionist. And this thing in 1844, after a failure, he didn't give up. He refined his views, and they really sound quite modern in hindsight. Okay, moving on from Mordechai Emanuel Noah. The rest we're going to go through a lot faster. I wish I could do more in detail with each of these figures, but we're going to just touch on them. Emma Lazarus. Emma Lazarus was also a member of our congregation here in Shearith, Israel, from an old Sephardic family going back to their days of colonial days. And some of her, I think her uncle was a president of the congregation Shearith, Israel. So an old and important family. She is educated and she begins writing, and her father thinks that her writing is good, so he publishes it. Self-published, it's not, no one really knows about it, but it catches the eye of some of the famous writers of the day, like Emerson and others. And then she becomes famous, and she corresponds with others, and she starts publishing in newspapers. And her writing is really becomes more and more famous as she starts to grow up. She has a very short life, and one wonders if she had lived longer, what would have become of her. But in the 1880s, her thinking changes. So she sees pogroms in Russia, and she sees these pogroms, and she thinks that Jews need to take action, and there needs to be a place for them to go. And she writes a poem, a really strong poem, which I'm going to read to you here, called "The Banner of the Jew." Wake, Israel, wake! Recall today the glorious Maccabean rage, the sire heroic, hoary gray, his fivefold lion lineage, the wise, the elect, the help of God, the burst of spring, the avenging rod. From Mitzpeh's mountain ridge they saw Jerusalem's empty streets, her shrine, laid waste where the Greeks profaned the law with idol and with pagan sign. Mourners in tattered black were there, with ashes sprinkled on their hair. Then from the stony peak there rang a blast to open the graves down toward the Maccabean clan, who sang their battle anthem to the Lord. 5 heroes lead and following, see, 10,000 rush to victory. Oh, for Jerusalem's trumpet now to blow a blast of shattering power, to wake the sleepers high and low and rouse them to the urgent hour. No hand for vengeance, but to save, 1,000,000 naked swords should wave. Oh, deem not dead that martial fire, say not the mystic's flame is spent. With Moses' law and David's lyre, your ancient strength remains unbent. Let but an Ezra rise anew to lift the banner of the Jew. A rag, a mock at first, ere long, when men have bled and women wept to guard his precious folds from wrong, even they who shrunk, even they who slept, shall leap to bless it and to save. Strike for the brave, revere the brave. This is a call to take action and restore a Jewish homeland so that those who are oppressed have somewhere to go, to save, what does she say? Not for vengeance, but to save 1,000,000 naked swords should wave. We could quote more, but I think that's enough. It's powerful on its own. So Emma Lazarus, she doesn't just write poetry, she also she helps organizationally with certain movements to help the downtrodden, especially poor Jews coming out of Russia. Of course, she's most famous for, I think what you all probably know her for, is for the New Colossus, which is written on the Statue of Liberty. And so she was, before Herzl, about 10 years before Herzl, she could be considered a proto-Zionist, putting out a clarion call for Jews to return to Israel and there should be a homeland for them to go to protect them from anti-Semites in Europe and elsewhere. Moving more quickly, because I don't want to take too much of your time. We're going to move now to the next figure, and that's Henry Pereira Mendes. Henry Pereira Mendes, I have mentioned before many times. He is really deserves an academic biography, he should be known by everyone. He's amazing. Just a little bit of his biography. He's born in England. He studies in his father's religious school for Jews. His father runs a high school. His father's a rabbi in England. And then he goes and becomes the rabbi in Birmingham, the Spanish-Portuguese congregation in Birmingham. And shortly thereafter, he's called to come to New York to be the assistant chazan, the assistant rabbi under Jacques Judah Lyons. In fact, I think he is called to become the preacher while Lyons is the chazan. In 1877. Lyons then falls ill and passes away only 3 or 4 months after Mendes came. And so they asked Mendes to be the chazan as well, which he did. And then he had a very long, 60-year career here at Shearith Israel. And that would be enough if it was just that. But that's not just, I could go on and on. He was a medical doctor. He was a musician. Some of our most amazing pieces of the liturgy, songs, melodies are written by him. He was an organizer of JTS and of the OU and other things. And he was a Zionist, true Zionist. He starts already before Herzl, but he's a contemporary of Herzl. Thank you. And I'm just going to quote a little bit on the left. You have an article from his 60th birthday, or 60th birthday in the pulpit. He's more than 60 years old then, I think. I don't know. And I quoted an excerpt from it because it talks about Zionism. This is 1934. So there is no Israel. The Nazis are in power in Germany, but World War II has not broken out yet. This is the news of the day. Born a rabbi, H.P. Mendes marks 60th birthday in pulpit. One of the pioneer Zionists, Dr. Mendes took a leading part in the introduction of the movement to this country, in the United States. And in his memoirs, he writes, this is a quote from Mendes. Soon after Dr. Herzl began his great movement, Dr. Gaster, chief rabbi of the Spanish-Portuguese community in England, called upon me in London. He was visiting, where I was visiting. Oh, he says it, saying that Dr. Herzl wished to meet me. They both called the next day, and Dr. Herzl asked me if I would undertake to introduce Zionist movement in the United States. I readily and eagerly consented. On my return to the States, I formed the first Zionist association, becoming its president. and I served for 1 year on the Actions Committee. My interest in Zionism has never been diminished, but I had to withdraw from active participation. He's being a little modest here. He did not actually withdraw from active participation. He withdrew a lot of things. But what happens, what he doesn't tell you what happens there is he was shot. and he had to convalesce for quite a bit of time after that. But that's a story for another day. But the person who was charged by Herzl to bring Zionism to America was Henry Paramendes, the rabbi of our congregation. Much later, in the 30s, you can see here on the right, he is a retired minister. He is emeritus. He is not in the pulpit anymore. You'd think if you were retired, you would take it easy. Mendes did not take it easy. Take a look on the right-hand side. Atlantic City. This is where Dr. Mendes was had like a summer home. It was not his regular residence. The Pereira Mendes Zion Club, named for Dr. H. Pereira Mendes, Rabbi Emeritus of Shearith, Israel, Spanish Portuguese Synagogue in New York City, held its first public rally here last night, Friday night. This is in Atlantic City. The meeting was addressed by Dr. Mendes. So he founded this society, which was named after him, in Atlantic City, the Pereira Mendes Zion Club. This club has been formed to give Zionism a loftier idealism. Rabbi Mendes explained, besides upbuilding Palestine, meaning to, he'll tell you, besides upbuilding Palestine, we must in Palestine and outside Palestine promote the erection of institutions and the promulgation of Bible ideals, such as the brotherhood of man, the end of war. Dr. Mendes stated, in every land, as well as in Palestine, we Jews must be an element making for good citizenship, for civic purity, for social high standards, and for professional and commercial integrity. We must make the name of the Jew respected. It is not respected as highly as it should be. We applaud the splendid accomplishments of Zionism in Palestine in laying the foundation for a Palestine, a Zion that shall be a cathedral whose spiritual influence shall mean spiritual uplift for Jew and Gentile in Palestine and outside Palestine. Zionism has not had the support it should from all Jews all over the world because it has not sufficiently stressed the spiritual. It needs a higher ideal than the materialities. And Zionism has not the support of nations because nations do not grasp the fact that our destiny is to be altruistic, to be a blessing. There should be by now a house of prayer for all nations. The nation's Supreme Court should be on Zion, not in Geneva. There should be on Zion a spiritual center to teach the world the three great R's: reverence, righteousness, responsibility. Dr. Mendes concluded. Dr. Mendes was the first president of the Zionist organization in the United States. He was asked personally by Herzl to introduce Zionism in the United States. Dr. Mendes also served as a member of the Actions Committee of the Zionist organization. Now, if you go to the WZO has a website which has archives, and you can find letters from Herzl talking about Mendes. You can, not as many as I thought I would find, but there are archival records of Herzl, of Mendes' activities, Zionist activities in the early days of Zionism, from 1898, 1899, 1900. Which maybe one day I'll look at, but not for today. But this is a good example. It's late in his, but he wrote many articles, including a really famous one where he wrote Looking Ahead in 1899. He wrote Looking Ahead at the Next Century. And he calls for a return to Palestine. He calls for Zionism, but his Zionism is not the same Zionism as Herzl. He's not interested primarily in agriculture and building up industry in Israel. He's a rabbi. He's interested in having a spiritual home, a universalistic spiritual home for the Jews in Israel, one that would be at the top of the religions of the world, that Mohammedans, he writes, and Christians would look to the Jews for their ideal country and of tolerance for all people. And he thought that would be such a great success, or ought to be such a great success, that what we call the UN or the League of Nations would be based in Jerusalem. And he writes about that here in this little article as well. That everyone would look to Jerusalem for guidance. And if they had questions about disputes between nations, they would go to Jerusalem, where the peace would be made. Dr. Mendes was a tzaddik in every possible way, and including his Zionism, where he wanted it to be a religious Zionism, not in a orthodox versus reform or conservative way. No, he meant simple, pure adherence to Bible principles, following the way of the Lord, and morally, and that should be the basis for the Jewish homeland in Israel. Anyway, we can be rightly proud of Dr. Mendes. He was both a dreamer and a doer. In the archives of our synagogue, there are a lot of things that can be found, but one of them that I want to show you is this little card here on the left. This is when he came back from his meeting with Herzl in London. He wrote, this is May 1897, the Munich Conference. Dear sir, you are earnestly invited to attend a meeting to be held May 20th, 8 p.m. in the meeting room of the new synagogue, Spanish Portuguese 70th Street. They had just moved in. They had just moved into this location here, Central Park West and 70th Street, to take action upon the Zionist conference to be held in Munich the 25th, 26th, 27th of August. So it's coming up. Representatives of all countries in which Jews reside are expected to attend. Upon the agenda are the position of Jews in all countries in which they reside, reports on the colonization movement, the Chalukah, immigration question. This affects us especially. Agitation, funds, etc. Jewish question in the next diplomatic Congress of Great Powers. An exhibit of all the products of Jewish colonies at the Paris exhibition in 1900. I don't know what that's about. Dr. Herzl will act as reference on F, the letter F, Max Nordau on letter A, and it goes on and on. Now, in the archives, this letter appears. It's not just a letter. It also has a list of who he sent it to, which was the cream of the crop, the who's who of rabbinic and lay leadership, really mainly rabbinic leadership in the United States. I should have copied the list. I didn't. Right now, the names are escaping me, but Rabbi Wise and Rabbi, oh my goodness, I can't think of it right now. But it'll come to me after this is all over. The list will come to me. But that's who he's writing and inviting to come to Shearith, Israel here for a meeting about who's going to represent the American Jewry at the Zionist conference in Munich. So that's H. Pera Mendes. Finally, we're gonna close up tonight talking about David de Solapool, again, and his wife Tamar. We called her Tamar in my family. There's so much that could be said, and there are so many documents I could show you. I decided not to even. I just want to tell you a little summary. So David de Solapool was born in England, educated there, comes to America to be the assistant chazan, assistant rabbi, here under his cousin, who was Henry Pera Mendes. He meets, I think, or maybe he's set up even with a young woman named Tamar Hershenson. Tamar Hershenson was born in Jerusalem to a famous rabbi, Chaim Hershenson, who moved to America to become the chief rabbi of Hoboken. I kid you not, the chief rabbi of Hoboken, New Jersey. Mainly because he needed a parnassah, and he was not able to do so in Israel, even though he was well known and corresponded with many great rabbis and others throughout the Jewish world. He was not able to make a good living in Israel, and so he moves to America, where he's offered a job to be the chief rabbi of Hoboken. So Tamar has a very unique family with many interesting people. One day we'll talk about them. She has three sisters, all of whom became very prominent in different ways in the Jewish world. And they continue to speak Hebrew. They speak Hebrew. They refer to their father as Avi, or they say Avi, I think, and Imi. And you'll see in her writings, they're writing to each other, or she's writing to Dr. Poole about her father. She always calls him Avi. And Dr. Poole, they fall in love. They get married. And Dr. Poole has a chavruta with Hershenson where he writes about they spoke in Hebrew. They did their chavruta in Hebrew. Anyway, it's just interesting background because they're really very big Zionists. And it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the fact that Tamar was born in Israel, and her father, Chaim Hershenson, is a Zionist giant because he wrote Sifrei Kodesh about the halachot of Eretz Israel. And most famous one is something called Malki Kodesh, where he has Sheilot Tshuvot. I think they're imagined Sheilot Tshuvot, and no one actually was writing him these questions. He was posing the questions and writing the answers, all about the halachot of living in Eretz Israel. I don't know the answer, Professor Schwarzschild. I'll find out for the follow-up, maybe next year for next Yom HaAtzmaut. We'll see. Okay. The question was the Zionist conference was not in Munich, so I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, that was the background to the young couple of David and Tamar de Sola Poole. In 1919, after World War I, de Sola Poole, who is now he's still a junior rabbi in Shearith, Israel, he decides he's going to move to Israel. And so he moves to Israel to become the administrator for the Balfour Commission. The Balfour Commission, Balfour, that was the British idea that one day we're going to create, this colony that we have here in Palestine. We're going to make a homeland for the Jews there. We're committed to doing it. They didn't have a timeline. They didn't know how it was going to happen. They don't know. But Balfour Declaration was the Jews belong in Palestine, and we're gonna help that happen. And then after World War I, with the downfall of the Ottoman Empire, the Poole goes there to help the Balfour Commission, and he has writings that are in in various places, not as much in archives, but in several others, where he is serving in an official capacity, administrative capacity in Israel, and his job is to give out the charitable funds that are coming in from America. And he has a policy. He's not going to give out funds just because someone has a handout and needs it. He gives out money where it will relate to the upbuilding of Palestine. So he gives loans to people who want to start a business or start a farm or buy farming equipment or learn a new trade. But he's not giving handouts to the poor, at least in the traditional sense. I think there must have been some of that. But his whole mission was to build up Palestine. And he used his position in the Balfour Commission as the administrator of funds from America in this way. And so there's all sorts of letters from him to the greats, Jacob Schiff, and all sorts of other philanthropists in America of the day. He stays there for 3 years and he comes back to America. His wife, Tamar, becomes the president of Hadassah in the 30s. Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America. So she's also no slouch in her Zionist activities as well. And I could go on and on about all of them. But I'm going to stop here because it's 8:37. Sorry, everybody. And just show you this picture. And look at the faces on this picture. So right in front of you is David de Sola Poole, and right behind him is his wife, Tamar de Sola. Probably you've guessed what this is already. But if you haven't, this is at the UN in Lake Success in 1947, when the vote is being tallied for the creation of the State of Israel. And you can see that they are excited and smiling, and they were present at the counting of all the countries voting for whether there would be a State of Israel. And so I think of no other way to conclude than to think about the breadth of Shearith Israel members and ministers who dreamed of this moment that we're showing here that Poole was present for. From Gershom Mendy Satius to Mordechai Emanuel Noah to Emma Lazarus and Henry Paramendes, and finally here, David de Sola Poole and Tamar de Sola Poole were able to witness the creation of the state of Israel. Maybe next year we'll talk about what's happened in our congregation since. But I hope there's always room to keep going, and so I hope you all will be able to. Thank you for indulging me. I'm going to end the video now and take your comments. If anyone has any questions, just feel free to put it in the chat. It's in the video.